"You've worked enough, Dad. Just eat what's left." That's what he said. My own son, standing there with that turlistine, scraping the leftovers from his plate onto mine. In that moment, something in me broke quietly, not from hunger, but from humiliation. Years of sacrifice, love, and quiet giving collapsed into a single bitter sentence. I looked at the food on my plate and realized it wasn't just scraps of dinner. It was everything I had poured into a family that no longer saw my worth. That night, I didn't argue. I just nodded, smiled faintly, and made a promise to myself, one he never saw coming. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The morning light slid through the thin curtains of my small room, painting soft gold stripes across the wooden floor. Outside, the maples were turning orange, their leaves brushing against each other like whispers. Autumn had always been my favorite season. Steady, reflective, not too loud. I liked that. I needed that. My name is Robert Hayes, 67 years old, a retired mechanical engineer who once spent half his life fixing things that flew. These days, I fix what doesn't. Leaky pipes, flickering bulbs, and my own loneliness. I'd been living with my son Ethan and his wife Melissa for almost 8 months now. After Margaret, my wife, passed away, the house we built together in Akron felt too big, too silent. Ethan insisted I move in with them. "You'll have company, Dad," he'd said, smiling but checking his phone at the same time. His wife added, "And Jacob would love to have his grandpa around." I believed them. Or maybe I just wanted to. Their house in the suburbs of Cleveland was nice, modern, open, full of light, the kind of place designed for people who had somewhere to be. I usually woke up before everyone else, made coffee in the quiet kitchen, and turned on the old AM radio I'd brought with me. The news anchor's voice crackled with updates about the economy, a plane prototype, and sports. It reminded me of the factory, of the smell of steel and oil. Those memories kept me grounded, though they belonged to a different life. When Jacob came running in, still wearing his dinosaur pajamas, he threw his arms around my legs. "Morning, Grandpa," he said, laughing. That little boy's joy was the first warmth of my day. "Morning, champ," I said, handing him a piece of toast. "Your dad up yet?" He shook his head. "Mom says breakfast is ready for you in 10 minutes. He ran off again, leaving a trail of laughter that lingered like perfume. I sat back at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee slowly. On the counter, Melissa had left her notes for the day: grocery list, meeting times, a reminder to call the landscaping company. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. She was always organized, always efficient, and yet somehow, every word she spoke to me felt rehearsed. She'd smile when Ethan was around, but the moment he left, her tone cooled into polite frost. Still, I told myself it was just adjustment. I was a guest after all. Ethan came down the stairs dressed in a navy suit, tapping at his smartwatch. "Morning, Dad," he said quickly. I nodded. "Morning, you're off early?" He gave a half laugh. "Big week, presentation with the new investors." I wanted to ask more, to know what kind of projects he was building, to share the same curiosity for machines that once bonded us. But before I could, Melissa appeared behind him, holding a travel mug. "Honey, you'll be late," she said softly, her hand on his arm. He kissed her cheek and left. I smiled at them, but they didn't see it. When the door closed, the silence felt thicker than before. I glanced around the bright, tidy kitchen. It wasn't really mine, it never would be. I wiped the counter anyway, out of habit. That's what men of my generation did. We stayed busy so our hearts wouldn't rust. I thought of Margaret's laughter echoing in our old house, of her calling me Mr. Fix-It when I managed to repair her sewing machine one Christmas. The memory stung like the cold air that seeped through the window. Sometimes, while tending the small garden in the backyard, I caught Melissa watching me through the glass doors. She'd smile faintly, then look away. Maybe she pitied me. Maybe she didn't know how to fit an old man into her carefully arranged life. Either way, I didn't blame her. I told myself that being near my family, even as a quiet presence, was enough. As the sun rose higher, I cleaned the tools in my small shed. Dust motes floated in the beam of light, cutting across the workbench. On the wall hung a framed picture of me and Ethan when he was 10, both of us covered in grease, laughing over the go-kart we built together. He had the same spark then, wide-eyed, curious, full of life. Somewhere along the years, that spark dimmed under spreadsheets and late meetings. I wondered if he ever missed those simpler days. By noon, the house came alive again. Melissa reheated leftovers, humming under her breath. The smell of coffee lingered, the kind that wasn't mine. I sat near the window, watching Jacob play with his toy plane, and realized that in this busy household, I had become background noise. And yet, for that one moment, when Jacob waved at me and yelled, "Grandpa, look! It's flying!" I smiled. Maybe not everything that's quiet is empty. Sometimes, silence is just love waiting to be noticed. If you're still watching and can feel the sting of that first moment of betrayal, comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Stay right there. Things are about to take a turn you won't see coming. The night smelled of roasted rosemary chicken and expensive wine. Melissa had been preparing all afternoon for Ethan's business dinner, and the house looked like something from a lifestyle magazine. Candles glowed on the long oak table, their reflections trembling against crystal glasses. I helped arrange the plates, polished the silverware, even fixed the flickering light above the dining area. It felt good to be useful, to contribute, though I wasn't quite sure what role I played in these gatherings anymore. When I asked Melissa where she wanted me to sit, she smiled politely, a tight, practiced kind of smile. "Oh, Dad," she said lightly, "maybe you could eat later in the kitchen. We're short on seats, and Ethan's colleagues will be here soon." Her tone was wrapped in courtesy, but the words landed heavy. For a moment, I stood there holding a folded napkin, unsure what to do with my hands. "Of course," I said quietly. "That makes sense." The doorbell rang, and laughter filled the house. I stepped aside, letting the tide of young professionals sweep in, sharp suits, loud perfume, and the easy confidence of people who belonged. Ethan's voice carried through the hall, warm and booming. "Welcome, make yourselves at home." I heard him introduce Melissa, his amazing wife who keeps me sane. She laughed, graceful and composed, every inch the perfect hostess. From the kitchen, I could hear the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. I sat by the counter, eating a few bites of salad, pretending I didn't mind. But each laugh that echoed from the dining room carved a little deeper into me. I used to host dinners too, back when Margaret was alive. She'd hum while stirring the gravy, and I'd carve the roast. Friends would sit around the table, talking about everything from baseball to broken engines. Those nights had warmth. This one had polish. When the guests toasted, I raised my own glass of water quietly, a private salute to the ghosts of better times. The scent of lemon pie drifted in, sweet and nostalgic. And for a second I saw Margaret's face in my mind. Her eyes crinkled, her voice saying, "You always make too much, Robert." I smiled sadly. Tonight, there was plenty of food, but somehow, there wasn't enough room for me. By 10 o'clock, the laughter began to fade. Guests put on coats, leaving with handshakes and promises of follow-up meetings. I heard Melissa saying, "Thank you so much for coming," in that perfectly polite voice she used for everyone. I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing dishes that weren't mine. When Ethan came in, he looked tired, but pleased. "That went well," he said, loosening his tie. They liked the house, said it felt warm and professional. I nodded, unsure what warm meant anymore. "You did great," I said softly. He smiled distractedly, already checking his phone. "We're heading out for drinks with the partners, just to celebrate a bit." He turned to leave, calling over his shoulder, "Dad, don't waste food. Eat what's left." I froze. The words hung in the air like smoke, sharp and impossible to ignore. Eat what's left. He didn't mean harm. It was a careless, thoughtless phrase. But in that instant, something inside me cracked. It wasn't about the food. It was about what I had become. Someone they assumed would take scraps. someone who no longer deserved a seat at the table. The front door closed behind them, their laughter drifted off into the night as the car engine started. The house fell silent again, save for the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by empty plates and the faint smell of wine. The candle flames were dying, one by one. I sat down at the edge of the counter. The leftovers were still warm, half a roast, a bowl of mashed potatoes, a slice of untouched pie. I stared at them for a long time, then picked up my fork, but the first bite wouldn't go down. My throat tightened. I set the fork aside, wiped the table, and reached for my wallet. Inside, tucked behind an old receipt, was a small photo of Margaret. She was smiling, wearing her Sunday hat, sunlight bouncing off her curls. "I'm trying, Maggie," I whispered under my breath. "I really am." The sound of my own voice startled me. I slipped the photo back into my wallet, stood up, and began cleaning the dishes one by one, methodically, like a man erasing evidence of something too painful to name. When I was done, I looked around. The kitchen gleamed, spotless and cold. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the window. Outside, the moon hung low over the quiet street. I lingered for a moment before heading upstairs. That single sentence, "Don't waste food, eat what's left," echoed in my head like a bell tolling for something I hadn't realized was already gone. If you're still here and your heart's already racing from how cold that moment felt, drop a number 2 in the comments. The deeper truth behind all of this is just beginning to unfold. The first frost of the season arrived early that week. The air outside had turned sharp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and chimney smoke. I was sweeping the driveway when the mail truck pulled up. The carrier waved, left a thick envelope in the box, and drove off. It was from Western Federal Bank, the same one that had handled my mortgage years ago. I hadn't heard from them since Margaret passed. Curious, I tore it open. Inside was a letter thanking me for completing the property transfer and refinance under the new ownership of Ethan Hayes. I read it twice before the words made sense. New ownership, my house, my old home in Akron, was now legally under Ethan's name. There was a form attached, neatly scanned, with my signature at the bottom. Except, I didn't remember signing anything like this. My first thought was that it had to be a clerical mistake, but the more I looked at that looping familiar R in Robert, the more uneasy I felt. My hand trembled slightly as I held the page up to the light. The ink was real. The date was from last year. My son had told me we were refinancing his home for a better insurance rate, asked me to sign a couple of forms to confirm residency. I'd trusted him completely. The kettle whistled behind me, but I didn't move. I just stood there at the kitchen counter, staring at that forged piece of paper. My heart thudded in my chest, not from anger yet, but from disbelief. How could Ethan, my own son, use my name like that? Why would he need to? When he came home that evening, still in his office clothes, I waited for him in the living room. The TV was off, the only sound the ticking clock on the wall. "Ethan," I said calmly, holding up the letter, "did you refinance the old house?" He froze for half a second before composing himself. "Yeah, Dad. Just for convenience. We needed to handle some paperwork for taxes. You still have your share, don't worry." His tone was too casual, too rehearsed. I pressed. "Then why does it say the property's been transferred to you completely?" He exhaled, forcing a laugh. "You probably forgot, Dad. You signed that when we refinanced last year. Remember? You were helping us out." I studied his face, how he avoided my eyes, how his jaw tightened just a fraction. "I don't remember signing that." "Dad, you've had a lot on your mind," he said, already walking toward the stairs. "It's fine. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine, not even close." That night, I sat alone in my room, the bank letter spread open on the table. Margaret's photo stood beside it. "You always told me to read the fine print, didn't you?" I murmured. "Guess I failed that lesson." The silence that followed felt heavier than any answer she could have given. The next morning, I drove downtown to the bank. The wind cut through my coat as I walked into the lobby. I asked to speak with someone about the refinance documents. The young woman at the counter smiled politely. Sir, everything appears valid. The signatures match. The property has been under Mr. Ethan Hayes' name since last June. I tried to steady my voice. Could I see the original document? I'm sorry, sir, she said, her tone softening. Only the listed owner or a legal representative can access the file now. The world tilted a little then. I thanked her, walked out into the wind, and sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel. My breath fogged the windshield. My son had not only lied, he'd taken what was left of my independence. That evening, I began to notice things I hadn't before. Melissa checking mail before I could, whispering on the phone about finalizing paperwork. Ethan avoiding conversations about money. At dinner, she mentioned something about investing once everything's under our name. The words slid past her lips casually, but to me they sounded like a confession. I excused myself, went to the small workshop behind the house, and shut the door. The air smelled of oil and dust, familiar, safe. I sat at the workbench, turned on the lamp, and opened my old notebook, the one I used for design sketches. But instead of machines, I began writing. Dates, details, names, what was said and when. I should have listened to you, Maggie, I whispered. You always told me not to sign things blindly. The bulb above flickered, casting shadows across the bench. I looked at the page, at my shaky handwriting, and realized this was no longer about money. It was about respect, about trust broken beyond repair. If they want to play with papers, I muttered, closing the notebook slowly, I'll play by the law. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, melting the last of the autumn leaves. I watched them drift down through the workshop window, cold, silent, and pure. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet decision had already been made. If you're still watching and can sense the tension building, go ahead and comment number 3 below so I know you're following every beat. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happens next. Snow had begun to fall heavily that week, soft and soundless, covering the streets of Cleveland in a indifferent calm. From the kitchen window, I watched flakes settle on the fence and melt against the faint warmth of the light. A month ago, this house had felt like safety. Now, every wall seemed to echo with lies I hadn't asked to hear. I moved quietly through the rooms, keeping my thoughts to myself. Anger, I'd learned long ago, was a poor mechanic. It broke more than it fixed. Still, something inside me had shifted. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own son. Not physically, but morally. The kind of fear that comes when you realize you've raised someone you no longer recognize. 2 days after the letter arrived, I called an old friend, Charles Coleman, my former attorney and the man who'd helped me set up my retirement fund. We hadn't spoken in years. His voice was as steady as ever when he answered. Robert Hayes, he said, half laughing. You still alive, old man? Barely, I replied, forcing a smile he couldn't see. Charles, I need a favor. Legal eyes on something. We met at a small diner off Route 21, the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. Snow clung to my coat as I slid the envelope across the table. He opened it, adjusted his glasses, and read in silence. After a few minutes, he looked up. This signature, he said, tapping the page, doesn't match your file. It's been replicated, but not perfectly. My stomach tightened. So, it's fake, he nodded slowly. Looks like it. But proving it? That's another story. You'll need copies of the refinance documents, transaction records, and any communications between Ethan and the bank. Without those, it's your word against theirs. I sighed, rubbing my temples. He's my son, Charles. I don't want a war. Then you shouldn't have let him start one, he said gently. Get the evidence. Quietly. Paper trails never lie. That night, I tried talking to Ethan one last time before resorting to lawyers. I waited until after dinner when the dishes were stacked and Jacob was upstairs watching cartoons. Son, I said, keeping my voice calm, if something happened with the property, I just need to know the truth. He barely looked up from his phone. "Dad, I told you. It's handled. You signed everything. Stop worrying." "I don't remember signing those papers." He sighed, setting the phone down with a click. "You probably forgot. You're not used to how refinancing works these days. Trust me, it's fine." I held his gaze. "Ethan, I built that house with my own hands. If something's being hidden from me..." Melissa cut in from the doorway, arms crossed. "We've been paying all the bills, Dad. You should be grateful we're taking care of everything." The words stung more than I expected. Grateful. As if I were some dependent, not the man who'd kept a roof over their heads years before they could afford one. I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped. Arguing with them now would only make me look weak. That night, I sat in my room for hours, staring at the framed photo of Margaret. "They don't see me anymore, Maggie," I whispered. "Just a burden with a pulse." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of realization. Something had broken beyond repair. The next morning, I began what Charles called the quiet war. I bought a small voice recorder, tucked it in my shirt pocket, and started documenting everything. Every conversation about money, every mention of our house, every whisper I caught between Ethan and Melissa. I took photos of mail they left open on the counter, noted bank envelopes, even copied account numbers when I could. It wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. In the evenings, I sat at my desk compiling everything. I learned how to download online bank statements, how to cross-check digital transfers. It turned out Melissa had moved several payments from their joint account to a personal one under her maiden name. "Stay calm, Robert," I remembered Charles's voice saying. "Paper trails tell the truth." After a week, I told Ethan I wanted to spend a few days at the old house in Akron, just to check on some repairs before winter. He barely reacted. "Sure, Dad," he said, not looking up. Melissa added coldly, "Do what you want." That night, I packed a single suitcase, my old notebook, and the envelope of documents. When I turned off the lights in my room, I didn't feel sadness, only relief. The house in Akron smelled like time itself. Dust, wood, and faint traces of Margaret's perfume that clung to the curtains. I built a fire, made coffee, and sat by the window watching snow fall over the empty street. For the first time in months, the quiet felt peaceful, not punishing. I opened my notebook and wrote on the first line, "I won't be fooled twice." The flame flickered against the glass, reflecting in my eyes. I wasn't the same man who'd stood silent in the kitchen weeks ago. I wasn't anyone's burden. I was a man who had been betrayed and who now knew exactly how to fight back. If you're still here and this story is hitting closer to home than you expected, type number 4 in the comments to show you're with me. What happens from here will change everything. Snow was falling again that evening, soft and relentless, coating the neighborhood in white. The streets glowed under the amber light of the lampposts as I parked my car in front of Ethan's house. I hadn't been back since I moved out a month earlier. Ethan had called 2 days ago, asking if I'd come for dinner. "Just family," he said. "Let's talk things through." His tone was calm, almost pleading. I agreed, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted answers. The warmth of the house hit me as soon as I stepped inside, but it felt artificial, like a mask hiding tension. The table was set with precision, polished silverware, folded napkins, 2 bottles of wine breathing in crystal decanters. Melissa greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So good to see you, Dad," she said. I nodded politely, hanging up my coat. The smell of roasted beef filled the air, but it only made the silence heavier. Ethan tried to fill it with small talk. "How's the old house? Everything holding up?" I took my seat at the far end of the table, opposite them both. "It's fine," I said. "Peaceful." The word hung there, pointed. He shifted uncomfortably, then poured wine into my glass. Jacob sat beside me, poking his mashed potatoes, sensing something wrong. "You excited for school tomorrow, buddy?" I asked softly. He smiled weakly, then looked down again. The first half of dinner passed in quiet clinking of cutlery and polite phrases. I studied Ethan and Melissa, how coordinated they seemed, how carefully they avoided looking directly at me. My heart beat slow but steady. The papers in my coat pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. Then, like a spark in a dry field, Melissa said, "We've been thinking, maybe we should rent your old place. The market's great right now, $3,000 a month, easily." I set my fork down. "My old place?" I asked. "The one that's already under your names?" The air thinned instantly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Dad, let's not make this a big deal tonight," he said quietly. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "This is a big deal, Ethan. That's a copy of the document you filed with the bank, the one with my forged signature. That's fraud." Melissa's face went pale. Ethan stared at the folder, but didn't touch it. "Dad, you don't understand?" "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You took something that wasn't yours. You lied to me, and you forged my name to do it." He swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "We just wanted to make sure everything was secure for the future. Our future," I leaned forward. "By stealing your father's past?" Melissa's restraint broke. "You're overreacting. That house was sitting empty. You don't even need it anymore." Her voice rose sharp as glass. "You should be grateful we're handling your affairs." Grateful. The word hit harder than any insult. I pushed back my chair slowly, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from fury contained too long. "Grateful," I repeated. "I spent 40 years building that home with my bare hands. Every nail, every beam, and you call it wasted?" Ethan stood up, panic flickering in his eyes. "Dad, please calm down. We can fix this." "There's no fixing fraud," I said coldly. "I have a recording of Melissa discussing the transfer. I have witnesses from the bank. This," I pointed at the folder, "is going to the authorities." Melissa's composure cracked. "You're trying to ruin your own son's career," she shouted. I looked at her evenly. "No, he did that himself when he chose greed over family." The room went still except for Jacob's quiet whimper. Ethan's face twisted with guilt, and finally he said it, barely above a whisper. "It was Melissa's idea. She said we needed to secure our future." The confession didn't bring satisfaction. Only a hollow ache spread through my chest. "You didn't just take my house," I said, voice shaking. "You took the one thing I built my life around: trust." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Ethan's voice break. "Dad, wait, please." But I didn't. I couldn't. Outside, the snow was falling harder, the flakes swirling under the streetlight like ash. I gripped the folder tighter as I walked to my car, my breath turning to mist. Through the windshield, I saw my reflection, an old man, worn but unbroken. As I started the engine, I whispered to myself, "You were right, Maggie. Pride blinds judgment." The tires crunched over the snow as I pulled away from the house. I didn't look back. Ahead, the city lights blurred through the falling snow, and somewhere in their glow, I could see the faint outline of justice waiting. That night, the father who left that house was not the same man who had entered it. Something had ended, and something far stronger had begun. The days after the dinner felt endless. Cleveland had fallen silent under a heavy blanket of snow, as if the world itself was trying to bury everything that had happened. I spent my mornings staring out of the window of the old house in Akron, watching flakes drift past the glass, melting before they hit the sill. The quiet was both comforting and cruel. I told myself I'd come here to think, but the truth was simpler. I didn't know how to forgive, and I didn't yet know how to let go. Ethan called the next day. I let the phone ring twice before answering. His voice was tight, shaking. "Dad, please don't do this. It'll destroy us," and I looked out at the snow-covered yard. "You destroyed it already, son." I hung up before he could answer. After that, the silence grew thicker. Every creak in the house reminded me of Margaret, the way she used to hum while folding laundry, the smell of her cooking that lingered long after dinner. I'd lived half my life believing family was built on trust. Now that foundation felt cracked beyond repair. I wanted to forgive Ethan, I really did. But every time I saw the letterhead from the bank, every time I thought of the forged signature, The anger returned like a tide. One afternoon, I found Mr. Coleman's card tucked inside my wallet. He had always been the kind of man who saw things clearly, never lost in emotion. I called him. "Robert," he said gently, "come see me tomorrow. We'll talk." The next day, I drove through icy roads into downtown. Coleman's office was the same as ever, bookshelves heavy with law journals, a clock ticking steadily in the corner. He looked at the documents, adjusted his glasses, and said, "This signature doesn't match your legal one. This looks forged, Robert." His voice was matter of fact, but his eyes softened. "We'll need proof. Find out how it was done. Don't confront him again until you're ready." That night, I sat alone at the diner near the courthouse. A man named David Clark, a retired detective Coleman had recommended, slid into the seat across from me. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp. "Mr. Hayes, Coleman told me what happened," he said. "If there's forgery here, we'll prove it. I'll trace every record, every login the bank processed." I nodded, my throat tight. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to direction. Over the next few days, David worked quietly but efficiently. He called with updates from time to time. "Melissa accessed the bank portal using an ID in your name." Another day, "There's an IP log from her laptop." That's evidence each word carved the truth deeper. She hadn't just gone along with Ethan, she had orchestrated it. When Coleman filed the preliminary fraud complaint, Ethan showed up at my door. He looked exhausted, older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper. "Dad," he said softly, "please, don't drag this into court." I kept my voice steady. "You didn't make a mistake, Ethan. You made a choice." He stepped forward. "I was trying to protect my family." I looked at him for a long moment, the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike standing before me as a man who'd lost his way. "And I was trying to protect mine," I said quietly, "from losing its soul." He said nothing after that, just lowered his head and walked away. Watching him go, I felt something inside me break. Not the part that loved him, but the part that still believed he could fix this. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the flickering flames. The legal documents were spread across the table, the ink still fresh. I read them once, twice, then picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the final page confirming the filing. It wasn't anger that guided the motion, it was necessity. I couldn't undo what he had done, but I could make sure the truth was written down. Undeniable. When I stepped outside afterward, the wind cut through my coat, but I barely felt it. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked to the mailbox and dropped the envelope inside. The sound it made when it landed, a soft thud, felt final, like closing a door. I stood there for a while, watching the horizon fade into dusk. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, but clarity. Some wounds didn't heal by forgiveness, they healed by truth. Looking up at the dim gray sky, I whispered to myself, "You can't rebuild what's rotten. You start again." The flakes swirled around me, blurring the world into white. I turned back toward the old house, my steps slow but steady. Behind me lay betrayal, pain, and loss. Ahead, though uncertain, was something clean, an honest beginning, even if it came at the cost of everything I once called family. Winter lingered longer than usual that year, as if Cleveland itself refused to move on. The snow that blanketed the city weeks ago had hardened into ice, covering everything in a dull white sheen. I spent my mornings the same way, shoveling the driveway of my old house in Akron, clearing the steps one scoop at a time. It was quiet here, peaceful in a way that didn't demand anything from me. Still, every now and then, I caught myself glancing at the empty mailbox, half expecting a letter, half dreading one. News traveled faster than I expected. The company Ethan worked for had suspended him pending investigation. The internal memo said it was about ethical and legal concerns, but everyone in the office knew what that meant. Melissa had been called in by the police for questioning. Her bank accounts were temporarily frozen. The very system they used to take what was mine was now closing in on them. Neighbors who had once greeted me politely now stopped me on the street, saying things like, "You did the right thing, Mr. Hayes." Not everyone would have had the courage. I nodded, but said little. Courage wasn't what I felt. It was exhaustion. I hadn't sought revenge. I'd just refused to be erased. Some nights, I lay awake listening to the wind whistle through the old cracks in the window frame. The sound was strangely comforting. It reminded me that I was still here, still standing, even if everything else had fallen apart. Then, one afternoon, Ethan showed up. I saw his car pull into the driveway, the same silver sedan he'd bought with his first big paycheck. It looked smaller now, covered in slush and dirt. He stepped out slowly, shoulders hunched, eyes sunken. He looked nothing like the confident man who'd once told me I didn't understand modern finances. I opened the door before he could knock. "You can come in," I said quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. Inside, I poured 2 cups of coffee. We sat across from each other at the same table where Margaret used to serve pancakes on Sunday mornings. The silence stretched until Ethan finally spoke. "They suspended me," he said, voice cracking. "They said the documents made them look bad. The papers. They ruined everything." I met his eyes. "No, Ethan. You did that the moment you signed my name." He flinched like the words had weight. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," he whispered. "Neither did I said, "until I realized you already had." For a moment, neither of us moved. The clock ticked loudly in the background. Ethan's hands trembled around his mug. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said finally. "I thought I was protecting us." Melissa said. I cut him off gently. "You need to stop blaming other people for your choices. You're a grown man, Ethan. You knew what was right." He looked down, tears welling up. "I don't even know who I am anymore." I sighed, the anger long gone, replaced by something quieter, sadness, maybe pity. "Then start by owning what you did," I said. "Maybe someday you'll earn back who you were." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be. The one who built go-karts with me in the garage, who once swore he'd never lie. I wanted to reach across the table, to tell him I forgave him, but the words wouldn't come. Forgiveness was too easy a word for a wound that deep. When he left, he didn't look back. The taillights disappeared down the snowy road, and I sat in the fading light of the kitchen, the house settling around me like an old coat. 2 weeks later, he called again. His voice was hollow. "She's gone, Dad." Melissa left. Took Jacob to her parents' place in Chicago. I didn't know what to say at first. Finally, I said, "Then maybe now you'll start seeing what really matters." There was silence on the line, then a quiet, broken, "Yeah, maybe." After that call, something inside me eased. The bitterness that had clung to me for months began to fade. I still lived alone, but the loneliness no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. I fixed things around the house, shoveled snow for the neighbors, even started helping an old friend at his repair shop on weekends. Life didn't feel full again, but it felt steady, and that was enough. One morning, I went out back and brushed snow off the stone bench where Margaret and I used to sit. I sat down, breath fogging in the cold air, and watched sunlight break through the clouds. The light scattered across the ice, blinding and beautiful. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't grieving. I was simply free. Spring came slowly to Akron that year, as if even the seasons needed time to thaw. The snow melted into soft puddles that shimmered in the morning light, and for the first time in a long while, I woke up without the weight of anger pressing on my chest. The case was over. The court had ruled in my favor. Ethan received a fine and community service, while Melissa finalized the divorce and moved with Jacob to Chicago. There were no winners, only endings, and strangely, that was enough. I spent my mornings in a rhythm that felt new yet familiar. I brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let the cool air in. I started going for walks around the neighborhood, greeting people I once avoided out of shame. Most smiled back. A few nodded in quiet respect. The whispers had stopped. I was no longer the old man whose family betrayed him. I was just Robert Hayes again, a man who had lived through something hard and come out standing. One afternoon, a friend from church, Tom Willis, told me the local vocational center was looking for part-time instructors. "You were a mechanic all your life, weren't you?" he said. "They could use someone who actually knows what a wrench feels like." I laughed for the first time in months. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a small group of men in worn jackets and oil-stained boots. Some were barely out of high school. Others were older than me, trying to start over after layoffs. "I'm not here to lecture you," I told them. "I'm here to help you fix things. Machines, sure, but maybe a few other things too." They chuckled. It felt good to make someone laugh again. Teaching gave my days shape. The smell of grease and steel, the hum of engines, the clatter of tools, it all grounded me. Each week, I saw small transformations in the men who came to class. The slumped shoulders that began to straighten, the quiet pride in a perfectly tuned motor. In their progress, I saw a reflection of my own repair. That's when I met Frank Peterson, a soft-spoken calligraphy teacher who worked in the same building. He was widowed too, and over lunch breaks we talked about loss, work, and the strange peace that comes with age. "You know," he said once, "people think getting old means fading out, but maybe it's just when the noise quiets enough for us to hear ourselves." I nodded, thinking of all the noise I had let consume me: anger, guilt, pride. Now there was only quiet, and in that quiet, I could finally listen. One Saturday, I was in the workshop grading student reports when I heard a knock at the door. Ethan stood there, dressed plainly in jeans and a faded jacket. His face had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something fragile. In his hands, he held a small wooden box. "I found these," he said. "Your old tools. Thought you might want them back." I opened the lid. Inside were the same wrenches and screwdrivers I'd used when I taught Adam how to fix his first bike. My throat tightened. "Thanks, son," I said quietly. He hesitated before speaking again. "I know you don't owe me anything. But I'm sorry, Dad, for everything, for hurting you, for forgetting what mattered." I studied his face. For the first time in years, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy who once looked up to me. "We can't go back," I said, "but we can move forward, honestly this time." He nodded, eyes glassy. We shook hands, not as enemies, not even as father and son, but as two men finally ready to stop fighting ghosts. When he left, I watched his car disappear down the road and realized my heart felt lighter. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd finally forgiven. Weeks passed. The local newspaper ran a short story about the vocational program. The reporter asked me, "Why keep teaching at your age?" I smiled. "Because rebuilding is what I've always done," I said, "with machines, and now with people." That night, I walked through the park as the sun dipped down over the thawing river. The air smelled of damp earth and renewal. On a bench nearby, a young father knelt beside his son, showing him how to tighten a bike chain. The boy laughed when the wheels spun freely. For a moment, I stood there watching, feeling something warm bloom inside me. "Maybe some cycles are meant to start again," I whispered. When I returned home, I went straight to the workshop. On the shelf sat an old clock Margaret had loved, a brass timepiece that hadn't worked in years. I took it down, laid it on the table, and began to clean the gears with careful hands. As I worked, the clock gave a small, stubborn tick, then another. Outside, the wind carried the sound of spring rain against the window. Inside, time began to move again. A full year had passed since the court ruling, though some days it felt like a lifetime. Summer had returned to Akron with quiet warmth, painting the trees in shades of deep green. My garden had grown wild, but I liked it that way. The untamed ivy crawling along the fence, the patch of daisies by the porch, all of it reminded me that life had its own way of healing without needing permission. Each morning, I woke to the same sound, the faint crackle of my old radio playing a station that favored classical music. Margaret used to hum along to those songs while cooking breakfast, and now, in the quiet of my kitchen, I found myself doing the same. I still lived alone, but the loneliness no longer pressed down on me. It simply existed, like an old scar you can touch without pain. I still worked at the vocational center, though work didn't feel like the right word anymore. It was more like purpose. I taught 3 classes a week, mostly young men who had lost their way, some fresh out of prison, others just trying to start over. They listened when I spoke, not because I demanded respect, but because they saw that I'd been broken and rebuilt myself, too. One afternoon, a student named Luis asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "how do you forgive people who hurt you so much?" I wiped my hands on a rag and thought for a moment before answering. "I stopped trying to forgive," I said finally. "I just started living again." He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did. Because forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't a single act. It was a quiet, ongoing decision to stop letting pain lead the way. Ethan and I had begun speaking again, not often, not deeply, but enough. He called every few weeks, sometimes just to ask how the garden was doing or to tell me about a project he'd started. I never pushed. Some wounds needed space to breathe, but each conversation felt like a small bridge being rebuilt, plank by plank. One Saturday, he came by with Jacob. The boy had grown taller, his voice carrying that boundless energy only children have. "Grandpa, look," he said, pointing to a toy drone buzzing in his hands. "Dad fixed it." I smiled. Looks like he still remembers a few things I taught him. Ethan grinned sheepishly. "Barely," he said. "We had to use one of your old screwdrivers." We spent the afternoon in the backyard, the 3 of us. I showed Jacob how to sharpen a knife on a whetstone, guiding his small hands carefully. The sound of metal sliding across stone echoed softly, rhythmic and steady. "Always respect the edge," I told him. "It's the part that can hurt you, or help you." He nodded solemnly, taking the words far more seriously than I expected. Ethan sat nearby, watching quietly. There was no tension in the air, no ghosts between us, just sunlight, laughter, and the faint smell of fresh-cut grass. As Jacob ran around chasing fireflies, Ethan turned to me. "I'm not sure I'll ever make it up to you, Dad," he said. I shook my head. "You don't have to," I replied. "Just be the man your son can look up to. That'll be enough." He smiled then, a real one, small, genuine, the kind that doesn't hide behind guilt. That evening, after they left, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea. The suns dipped below the horizon, spilling orange light across the sky. I opened the final letter from the courthouse, confirming that all documents related to the case were now sealed and archived. No further actions required. I folded it neatly and placed it beside my teacup. The sound of the old brass clock ticking inside the house reached me through the open window. Margaret's clock. It had begun working again after years of silence. Somehow, that small, stubborn ticking meant more than any verdict ever could. I leaned back and let the sounds of summer wash over me. Crickets, wind, the distant hum of life going on. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd found since. Loss had stripped me bare, but it had also shown me what truly mattered: dignity, truth, and the quiet strength of starting over. As the last light faded, I whispered into the dusk. Peace doesn't come when the pain ends. It comes when you learn to live with it. The wind carried my words across the yard, rustling the trees like an answer. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt that peace, not as something I'd earned, but as something that had finally found me. The mornings are quiet now, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full. Sunlight slips through the curtains, painting long lines across the kitchen floor. The smell of coffee drifts through the air, mingling with the faint hum of the radio playing an old jazz tune. I sit by the window, the same spot I've sat in every morning for the past year, and listen to the steady ticking of the clock Margaret once loved. It has become my favorite sound in the world, a reminder that time, relentless as it is, also gives second chances. There was a time when I believed peace only came when pain was gone, when the people who wronged you finally paid their dues. But I've learned that life rarely grants such clean conclusions. The truth is simpler, quieter. Peace doesn't come when everything is made right. It comes when you accept that not everything can be. Looking back, I don't regret the choices I made. I fought for what was mine, not out of vengeance, but because I needed to stand up for the man I used to be. The trial, the anger, the tears, they were necessary. They stripped me down until only the essential parts of me remained. I used to think justice was about winning. Now, I know it's about surviving with your integrity intact. There are days I still think of Ethan, not the man who betrayed me, but the boy who once fell asleep on my shoulder after fixing his first bike. I realize now that betrayal doesn't erase love, it only changes it. I don't love him less. I simply love him differently, with distance, with boundaries, and with hope that he'll continue to grow into someone his son can be proud of. Forgiveness isn't what I imagined it to be. It isn't grand or dramatic. It doesn't arrive with music swelling in the background or a sudden feeling of relief. It's small. It's choosing not to reopen old wounds every time you look at them. It's looking at the past and saying, "You don't own me anymore." I've stopped counting the things I lost: money, years, trust. Instead, I count what I've found: silence that comforts instead of condemns, mornings that start with gratitude instead of regret, and the knowledge that I can begin again, no matter how late in life it feels. People at the vocational center often ask me what I learned through all this. They expect a long speech about morality, maybe a warning about greed or family. But I usually just tell them this: pain is a teacher. You don't have to like the lesson to learn from it. One of my students once told me, "Mr. Hayes, you make it sound like time fixes everything." I smiled and shook my head. "No," I said, "time doesn't fix anything. It just gives you room to breathe while you fix yourself." And it's true. Time didn't erase what happened between me and Ethan. It didn't heal the wound completely. What it did was soften the edges, make the pain less sharp, the memories less heavy. It gave me space to stop fighting the past and start living in the present. Every evening, I wind the brass clock on the shelf. Its ticking fills the house with gentle rhythm. Margaret used to say that every tick was a heartbeat of the home. For a long time after she passed, the clock stopped working, as if it had gone silent with her. When I repaired it last winter, I realized something. The clock had never been broken. It was just waiting for someone to care enough to start it again. Sometimes, I think that's what life is: a series of broken clocks waiting to be rewound. We all stop, somewhere along the way. Then, if we're lucky, we find the courage, or maybe just the humility, to start again. I used to fear getting old. Now I see it as a privilege. Age doesn't steal meaning, it clarifies it. You learn that the small things, a warm cup of coffee, a quiet house, a call from your son, are the real treasures. You stop chasing what's gone and start cherishing what remains. As I sit here watching the light move across the floor, I rest my hand on the clock and close my eyes. The ticking continues, patient and steady, like time whispering its old truth, that every ending is only a pause before another beginning. Time didn't heal me. It simply taught me to keep walking, one honest step at a time. Life has a way of stripping us down to what truly matters. It doesn't always do it kindly. It tears, it burns, it tests until all illusions fall away. But when the dust settles, what remains is often stronger, truer, and quieter than anything we had before. Pain, as cruel as it feels, is rarely meaningless. It pushes us to see what comfort once blinded us to. That dignity is not found in control, but in endurance. That strength is not loud, but steadfast. And that peace is not granted by others, but built from within. There comes a point when every person must face the weight of what was lost and decide whether to carry it or let it go. Some choose bitterness, clutching old wounds until they define who they are. Others choose understanding, not because the past was fair, but because holding on too tightly only chains the soul to yesterday. In the quiet act of letting go, there is no surrender. There is courage, the courage to live again, even after the world has taken what seemed irreplaceable. Forgiveness, too, is misunderstood. It isn't about erasing the wrong or excusing the wound. It is about reclaiming freedom, the right to wake up each day unburdened by resentment. To forgive is not to forget. It is to acknowledge the truth and still choose not to be ruled by it. Time may not heal every scar, but but it teaches us how to live around them, how to let beauty coexist with what once broke us. And so life continues, softly, steadily, without fanfare. We rebuild what was torn down, not as it once was, but as something wiser. The house may be quieter, the heart slower to trust, yet, in that stillness lies a rare kind of grace. The truth is that endings are never just conclusions, they are transformations. In the end, it is not the victories or losses that define a life, but the quiet resilience to keep walking, to breathe, to begin again. To find, in the echo of all that was endured, the simple and profound truth that peace is not the absence of pain, it is the presence of understanding. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.